Hello and welcome to whatever this is or isn't or will be otherwise known as To Whom It May Concern. And today, I don't have a topic in particular, but I just felt the need to pick up the journal and read a random page and see what comes up. In fact, there are a few things that I can't stop thinking about, but perhaps I'm not ready to talk about without some sort of a prompt. So without further ado, let's see, where's the beginning of this? Okay. I found this part. Alright. I'm learning that people are such complex, multifaceted creatures. There's so many layers to us that are revealed under the right or wrong circumstances. I believe I react so severely to how I feel about people sometimes because I feel and see these layers and assume the responsibility to them surfacing, either to the layers separately or holistically to the whole of the individual in front of me. Especially if I care about these people, if I love them, I believe myself even more responsible. I suppose in the formula of love, that being seeing the self in the other, it is difficult to separate where the other begins outside of oneself, and thus even easier to seek to assume control of those processes too. That is perhaps the force of love. It provides endless resource to engage, to react, and to do. However, the act of love is to let things be as they are in their processes without enforcing action or expectation, to relate oneself to the other without seeking to have it, to own it, be it, control it, but to instead appreciate the process in all its uniqueness outside of your own and recognize its inherent magicality. What a word. I believe that is what love is in action. It begins with a recognition of the other outside of the self. The logical brain seeks to optimize, to judge and compare, to analyze. Love seeks to accept. The loving brain seeks to accept the different. The otherness of the other isn't seen or experienced as strange. The loving brain accepts its optimal path as a subjective, lonesome experience, as its own responsibility. The logical brain operates under the constraints that there is a limited number of things to be, so it can predict and control the outcome, so it can operate outside of instinct, but in fact, the logical brain is trapped in instinct. The loving brain evolved as a means to accept the difference, perhaps. The logical brain can be trained, taught, changed, adapted, broken. The loving brain submerges it in its waters. The loving brain slips in through the cracks and accepts all form is equally plausible and adapts to its volume. The logical brain is limited to the amount of information it has access to or is exposed to, and the loving brain expands infinitely beyond the bounds of probability of outcome, and all substance of information only add to its volume. The logical brain seeks to create order, and the loving brain seeks to accept chaos. The logical brain seeks to create order in naturality. The loving brain seeks to accept chaos in naturality. The logical brain seeks to use energy. The loving brain seeks to simply be. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna backtrack there and say I disagree. The logical brain doesn't seek to use energy to preserve energy, and the loving brain seeks to simply be. So in a way, this is where the logical brain and the loving brain perhaps shake hands and they're like, let's just chill, be lazy, and just love each other. Let's just eat and be merry. That's just the whole crux of ancient Greece, isn't it? It seems the logical brain might seek to reduce entropy. The loving brain operates perhaps on the basis that entropy is inevitable, and so were we. That is quite the prompt. There is another entry actually right next to it that kind of relates to what was written here, and I feel like I also want to read that because it elaborates further on the topic of love. So let me just go ahead. If love is the phenomenon of seeing the self in the other, love as a force is the tendency to associate it with the self and exerting or extending of the self's control over an outcome. Love as an act is to let it be as it is, different and evolving with every heartbeat adapting to its exposed environment, then empathy is the key to the possibility of love. In essence, the logical brain is often rendered as selfish because it only serves its own best interest. Not because it is inherently not good, but because its function is to optimize data gathered from the perspective of its physical body's tools to connect, to collect, and digest data. To give it morality is to overlook its entire purpose in existence. Beyond that, a most marvelous evolution of species explored another conundrum. What if there are other right ways to be? What if there are all the right ways to be against all sorts of shifting variables and environments, and all those right ways produce beautiful outcomes in the form of conscious species of creatures? Truly, I say, what an incredible thing to be. Literally. Is it easy to be the experiencing, ever aware, ever changing creature experiencing itself as it experiences? No. It is evidently clear that the more we are exposed to insurmountable amounts of information, we are rendered dysfunctional. And then I just end here, but I didn't really develop this thought. It's about the development of AI and the fact that also AI has limited quotient or limited tokens, or let's say pieces of information that it can actually process before it starts to deteriorate. And I suppose in a very similar fashion, that's also how our brains work. And in today's age of complete overwhelm and exhaustion and cognitive overload, I'm not surprised that a lot of us are losing sense of the self or even the other, right? I think that we are also really struggling in this phase of being, and by we, I just mean the culture that is spending a lot of time in socials, or like you can see the algorithmic development that it kind of matches whatever it is you think, whatever it is you like, or assumes that you're liking by just where you're directing your attention to, basically. And then almost like reflects that back to you and says, this is who you are, and these are the kinds of things that you like, right? And then your brain is growing and growing and growing in those particular directions, even if it doesn't want to. But our brains are these tools that just want to establish a particular reality and then hold true to it. I actually really like that this is where we landed today, because love has been a topic in my mind. I suppose, I mean, it's always been a topic of mind. Since I was a child, really, I've been struggling to understand what does it truly mean to love, right? When someone says, I love you, but their actions don't show it, what does that mean? When I love someone, what does it mean, right? For the longest of times, love was associated with a lot of pain, and I thought actually inherently that love is pain, or that love overcomes pain, or is supposed to overcome pain, right? That it's supposed to be such a powerful feeling that it overwrites everything else and it makes everything else obsolete. But then I guess years and years later, and maybe an introduction into adulthood has revealed that actually is not the case. Those are completely separate things, right? Love as an ability can also be, first of all, is also intentional, is also a skill, is also a compulsion in a way, right? Like it's so many things, but in fact, it is our own, it lives in us, and it begins with us, right? And it doesn't have to be associated with pain, but if truly that's what you believe that you deserve, then then love is going to also render that as something that you don't necessarily need to avoid, but it wants to have as a part of one's existence. And I suppose this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because if who we love and what we love is more like a reflection of ourselves in the other, as I wrote about in this entry, then what does it mean when we associate love with pain? Does it mean that there is pain inside of us in the first place? To recognize, to know where then we need to take that pain from to continue to live in this state of pain so that we're not forced to change. And this was the realization, or this was the struggle for me between the loving and the logical brain, where like a part of me realized that life doesn't have to be that hard, right? Or it's not supposed to be that hard. Well, there are a couple of things to touch on here. First off, us being complex, multifaceted creatures that are revealed sort of in the right or wrong circumstances, or just varying circumstance. This was a realization that I feel like nobody prepared me for. And let me Let me elaborate. There's quite a lot of things to unpack here. I'm just gonna start with for the first one. Because we are such complex, multifaceted creatures, we honestly spend so much of our lives trying to get to know each other, or like trying to know ourselves and understand who we are and what makes us us. And then I'll speak for myself. All of my life, I've been trying to understand people around me, and also through people around me, I've been trying to understand myself. What started this prompt in its entirety was like, why do I assume this responsibility for the other person just because I see those layers? I see that even though you've showed up here as my friend, I can see that you're also suffering as somebody's lover, for example. Or just because you showed up here as my partner doesn't mean that I can't actually see that you are hurt because of some circumstance. So it's essentially like these multiple layers come into view for me. And then when this is happening, for me, it's also hard to ignore. But the other aspect of it is then I'm assuming this responsibility, which can complicate things in the relationship. If I'm constantly asking what's wrong and I can feel that something is wrong and you're not ready to share, that's like the simplest example. But on the other hand, if I'm assuming that responsibility and I can sense that you're worrying or that you're stressed or that you are anxious, I'm gonna notice this in you and I'm gonna see where it's coming from, and then I'm gonna relate to that and I'm gonna empathize, and I'm going to then myself start to feel anxious and nervous, sometimes even angry. This responsibility, especially if the feeling, let's say it's somebody that I love and I notice that they're hurt, it becomes anger for the other person that has caused that hurt, if such a person or situation or circumstance exists. And so then in trying to understand this, I was like, okay, what part of this is actually love and what part of this is ego? The brain assuming some sort of responsibility over that portion of somebody's life or over that person's feelings or being. Why? Right? Do we really need that? Could we instead meet it with acceptance? Could we instead meet it with a healthy level of curiosity, right? For me, truly, the definition of love is the brain's capacity to see the self in the other. And why I honestly strongly believe this is that our brains are constantly seeking patterns in our environments that are familiar to us. What is more familiar to us than ourselves? It's always about finding other people that are having the same values, that behave the same way, that sound even the same, right? They're always kind of trying to reconnect something to something that is familiar to you. But then if you dig deeper than that, you actually see that that portion that you identify in the other is actually you. This is a fraction of you that is easier for us to see in the other than it is to observe and see in ourselves. Such is the nature of the brain. It's agnostic to whatever is happening behind these eyes, right? It's really hard to maintain awareness of what's going on in this brain. And this is why it is so important for us to have people around us, to have a community of people, to have friends, to have a second plus person, right? To be raised in a family of human beings that communicate to each other. It's so important for us to be witnessed from someone else other than our own, because our brain is blind to ourselves for the most part. What then would make most sense, or to me then what this sort of translates to, or what I've observed about love, is that actually, in essence, love is trying to first identify the self in the other, then understand it, like see it outside of ourselves, and then connect these two portions, let's say commonalities. You can say we find some common ground. There's some things that kind of feel like a prerequisite to something like this. First thing is empathy, because how could I ever see parts of you, any part of you, if I can't even recognize the other, right? This is then the distinction in my mind that I'm still kind of trying to separate the two, which is how does one not associate the other with the self to the point where it becomes you are me, I am you, right? Which is like this essence of merging. The other thing that is also important to identify is then if I do see commonalities between us, I think this is then the difference, right? That I'm able to see the differences and accept them. And this is then key to love becoming the magic that it is. Just to give a simple example, it's hard for some parents to accept that their children they're going to be different from themselves. They are their own unique creatures that are experiencing the world differently. There is no love like that of a parent and a child, because they're literally made of the same genetic material, meaning it's really hard for the brain to distinguish this other person as a separate entity of the self. So they become almost like an extension of you. But love, or that loving brain, should then connect those rest of the dots. Like, that's the idea of the logical brain seeks the sameness, right? Seeks familiarity, seeks what do I know? And because it operates on this instinct, it's like what I know, what I know and understand, I can control, and it makes me feel safe. What I don't know and what I don't understand makes me panic, or I see as a threat. When love comes in and says, actually, this is different, and I can see it, I can spot it, I accept it. That then becomes this almost like glue to a connection between two people that almost purifies it, right? Because then nothing between these two entities is going to cause friction, because love is there to glue the rest of the unfamiliarities, or to glue the differences together, just because it is not like the self. This information that I'm accumulating in my mind and I'm considering as truth, it doesn't mean that it's not the right way. We can be completely different ways, and there are so many right ways to be that I couldn't possibly, right, know everything. So I'm instead going to appreciate the fact, or I'm instead going to replace this feeling of unfamiliarity and threat and fear with love. I myself am going to then experience something that I know as love, which allows me to accept everything as comes and to accept everything as is. This is a bit all over the place, but I think something is there. So if love begins with the recognition of the other outside of the self, then empathy needs to be this bridge that connects the two. Yeah. But anyway, this is at least the theory that empathy is key to the possibility of love. The other thing is that I guess when you live your whole life thinking about love and writing about love and talking about love and trying to understand love, you eventually come to these crazy theories where you're trying to make sense of humanity and the world around you. When in essence, actually, I think the biggest understanding maybe that I've come to in life is that I have a big capacity to love. Me personally, I think sometimes even too much. Sometimes even too accepting of the differences, too accepting of the other. It makes me even think sometimes that it is like almost like a symptom of not a very strong sense of self. Because if I knew exactly who I was, if I knew all the parts and facets of myself to the point where I am confident in them, that I am self-assured, then would this mean that I am less likely to accept someone else that is different? Are they mutually exclusive, right? Like, can I be self-assured and a loving person? Can I be a person that accepts the differences between me and someone else and accept that I am as I am and not allow the world to then dictate who I am supposed to be? And this is the biggest conundrum that I have in my mind right now, because in understanding that my sense of self was underdeveloped, especially in the core years of my life, just in being an incredibly curious child and very sensitive, very, in that way, enamored with everything around me, very observant, always engaged in some form of play, and not really having this, or not being instilled this level of self-assuredness of this is how you are and that's completely okay. Maybe that's what was in essence missing. But the symptoms then of that are growing up an adult that is in a way changing and evolving and shifting depending on the circumstances and environments that I was exposed to, because all in all I approached them with curiosity, and that always led to love, right? And it's so easy for me to love. And this is the other thing. It's so easy for me to look around me and to see parts in nature that operate the same way that I know or believe that our brains operate too. And in essence, I understand how me and this tree in front of me also are more similar than we look. And then associate this perspective of, okay, we're not that different as we seem. And because of that, right, I'm capable of also loving this tree. And appreciating its existence and saying, it's incredible, all the processes that it is capable of. Like, look at all these things, so much to be fascinated with. And then also understanding that the reason why I can even be fascinated with this tree is because I have these eyes and this brain that can actually experience this tree in front of me and can witness it. If we were here to live solo or to fly solo, I think certain things like empathy or love or these aspects, connection, yeah, these words that inherently mean things coming together, they wouldn't exist in our vocabulary. We wouldn't even be talking about these things or thinking about these things. Romance, love wouldn't be the topic of humanity since the beginning of time when we've started recording it. Love has always been a topic. The topic has always been, how do we come together? And in that, how do we come together? I think it's just like with anything else, I suppose. It also begins with us, begins with this meat suit or body suit and the brain that it protects or it houses, and how this brain accumulates information and how then it associates that information with an essence or with a concept known as the self. This is who I am. And because I am who I am, I can't love something that doesn't fit certain prerequisites, the essence of bigotry, right? If I'm not gay, I'm not going to accept my child being gay. You're completely rejecting an aspect of your child, which is just who they are, right? And you're rejecting it on the grounds of some sort of belief. Underneath all of those values and that belief, there's perhaps a portion inside of yourself that you are also rejecting in essence. Love is less about how it needs to be. For example, a lot of people say that a parent loves a child no matter what, right? And we know that this is not true. I think when it is not experienced as love, what it actually could mean is that the parent is associating themselves with the child to the extent that they are denying the child their unique aspects of themselves, because they haven't trained this skill to accept the difference between them and the other or the rest of the world around them. They don't maybe have the self-awareness to understand what is different or to accept that there could be different, and that is also an okay way to be, operating on this instinct of I need things to be a certain way, this is the right way, and anything else is wrong. I suppose in this case what I would agree with in that statement is that there probably is no other connection in the world as that of a child and a parent. No deeper connection or no more secure or given connection, really. Because simply the formula itself, the formula of the parent and the formula of the child, those two are practically 50% of each other. Especially that the child is having to grow up in this environment and exposed to the parent. Maybe if the child is exposed to the parent and grown up around the parent, then they're going to be taking more and more of those values and become more and more as their parents. But in fact, from the parent's perspective, it's, again, almost impossible to see that difference. And I would understand why, because the brain has a very hard time doing that. But some parents do, right? Some parents accept their child being gay, even if they are not. Even if they are Muslim or Catholic or whatever, even if they come from a set of beliefs that are just inherently rejecting of those ideas. They simply cannot help themselves but to accept their child because they love them, because they have the capacity for love and they can give this to the child, and thus the child is secure in who they are and they feel safe in who they are, even being different. They feel like I am different and that is completely okay, right? And the opposite being, oh, I am different and I feel wrong. I feel like my existence is wrong. How can I fix this? So you're approaching even yourself with this mentality of that's not how things are supposed to be, because you don't see this acceptance around you. You're not approached, or you haven't been approached with this love or loving way of saying, no matter who you are, no matter how different we are from each other, I'm still going to accept you exactly as you are, and I'm still going to meet you there and love you. Fascinating thing, and why I say that this is something inherent or something that you learn is because I do believe that maybe even people that aren't inherently raised that way, or there isn't maybe a process in their brain that can relate to another. Maybe there is no empathy. Sociopaths, narcissists, whatever. This pathological behavior of not having empathy, simply not having that capacity in the brain. What does that mean? Does it mean you can't love? I honestly still believe that that person could learn love. That person could learn what love is and then be able to approach people in life with love. I mean, I firmly believe this, not in the way of saying like, oh yeah, for sure, everybody you could fix narcissists or you could fix these people. I'm not, not equipped to start that conversation, but just as a mental exercise, right? If there would be willingness for it, if there would be the recognition that, oh, okay, the world doesn't revolve around me, or just because I really inherently believe that my way is the right way and there is absolutely no other way but mine to be and to behave. If that is really your belief, I still believe that if you would be willing to understand that things can indeed be different and there is a way for you to accept them the way that they are. And the opposite is also true here. I don't think just because you are capable of love that this protects you from making the kinds of mistake that you may not approach somebody in a loving way, or may not be approaching somebody, or your child in this case, or whoever, with love. Why? If I don't have a strong sense of self, then I'm probably going to also miss the portions of someone else that is the way that they are, that is exactly that way and cannot change, and to fail to acknowledge that and to think, just because I can change, I'm also going to assume that you can change. Why do you need to change if this is the way that you are, and this is the way that you've operated your whole life, and this is the way that you are safe and happy? Who am I to tell you that you shouldn't be doing it this way or that, or you should be doing more that way, right? The loving brain again accepts that difference. So there are ways of both sides being completely self-assured and lacking this empathy, right, can grow into understanding that though you are self-assured, there are other ways to be, and we need to learn to accept them in order for us to operate as a healthy society, family, group of friends, whatever. And the other aspect of it is, if I don't really have a sense of self and I'm kind of changing and adapting to circumstances too much, then am I shape-shifting too much to the point where there is no sense of security in who I am? And also, I can't really offer myself that sense of security, and I'm expecting everybody else to sort of operate in the same way, because such is the nature of the brain. Anything in excess, I suppose, when I'm raising my hands like this, I'm saying on one hand is like excessive empathy, and the other hand is no empathy at all. And I guess, like the point is to kind of come somewhere here in the middle, or to meet somewhere here in the middle, to say, just because I have empathy doesn't mean that I can't just say no, for example. To say, I actually don't agree with you. That's it. I accept, but I don't agree. I don't have to agree. Versus the other side of saying, okay, I can see that you're different, and I know that you're wrong, or I believe that you're wrong. Let's agree to disagree. And then shake hands. And you call it a day. At the end of the day, I mean, as complex as this thing is, the ending snippet of it seems the logical brain might be seeking a way to reduce entropy, and the loving brain operates on the basis that entropy is inevitable, and so were we. I think there is something to say about this, because entropy is effectively the opposite of order. It's that point of chaos, or is the inclination of things to escalate from order to chaos. Ultimate chaos, so to speak. Logic seeks to pull a concept or experience towards order to make sense of it. Love says, I don't need it to make sense. In which case, then you are kind of escalating into more and more entropic circumstances, because now everything is acceptable and everything is allowed, and you could be 50,000 different things and categories, right? Order versus chaos, or in this case, it's escalating into entropy. I mean, consciousness was developed in this entropic state of being. Our brains are a result of entropy. Our consciousness is a result of entropy. So what is then the next step? What is then the next layer? If it's radical acceptance or radical love or whatever you want to call it, what is then the next step of that? I don't know. I'm asking an open question here. I'd be very curious to hear. But I think this is then the struggle in this dance between logic versus love. And one of them just needs things to be a certain way, and the other one says, it's okay, you can be whatever way you are, and I will still accept you and love you. And empathy being the capacity for us to even notice the difference. I think we're kind of landing on a very interesting thing, that maybe this is exclusively human, right? And that's why I also wanted just to read the other one, because what does it then mean to be this creature that can feel these things, that can, one, have a sense of self in the first place, feel like I'm somebody and that must make me important, or that must make me different from the rest, and I can see it, I can notice it, and I'm observing the environment, and I can tell how I'm different from things. Does a tree know that it is a tree? Who knows, right? But in our case, how weird is it? How literally incredible is it that we exist and we operate in today's time-space continuum right now in this existence. And then, it just kind of makes me look around and say, wow, this is one of those curiosities that will never be quenched for me personally. I don't know if it also strikes you as just so fascinating and odd at the same time, but it does make me happy to be alive, and it keeps me happy and joyful in being here, alive. And learning all these things and experiencing these things from my perspective. Why then it also becomes equally important that I maintain my self-awareness through talking, through writing, through therapy, through however we go about it. For me personally, it's that I want to understand how I can better love, how I can better offer this skill of mine that I seem to have plenty of it to give. How do I love better in a way that I can play this dance between the logic side of me and the loving side of me that is constantly battling. This yin yang, so to speak. Isn't everything a yin yang? Anyway, those are the thoughts of the day, I suppose. These thoughts have gone places I did not expect them to go. In earnest, I did not expect it to get this deep, and I did not expect it to get this far into this concept. But I hope, in any case, that sharing these thoughts has brought something new in your life, or has opened your mind to another way of seeing things, or even has introduced concepts that maybe you haven't heard or thought of before. I could have ended this in just reading that introduction, that entry, and I think it would have been enough. I guess I could end with two things. One, there is no right or wrong way to be. I think if we would try to the best of our ability to allow ourselves to be exactly who we are without these concepts kind of interjecting into the way that we are and forcing us to be a certain way rather than who we truly are, who ourselves truly has developed into being, I think we would simply be happier, right? If we would live in our authentic self, or through our authentic self every day. And that's hard. It's the hardest thing to do, to remove all of the barriers that we've been installed throughout our lives. The second part is in knowing that there is no right or wrong way to be, also approaching the other with curiosity rather than judgment. But even if you do approach somebody with judgment, make sure that at the end of that train of thought, wherever it is that it's taking us, that we come into a place where we ask questions and engage with curiosity rather than disconnecting or dejecting and then removing ourselves from this differing situation or this other that we can't seem to really associate with ourselves. I think the world would be a much better place if we would approach each other with curiosity, no matter where we begin, rather than end with dejection, and effectively putting somebody in a box and abandoning the box. In earnest, I think our ability to love as human beings, us as species, has given us this opportunity to grow beyond who we were way back when the first human grew conscious into who we are today, which is every single individual. We even have the concept of individuals now rather than just communal societies. We as a species have evolved to the point where every single one of us is a world in and of itself. And then we recognize the world that is every single creature and every single creation around us. And I think this is the fascinating aspect of what love allowed us to be. It allowed us to be different. So for sure, even in the awareness, that's the thing, even in the awareness of ourselves and in the awareness of the fact that our brain is operating to find the optimal existence for ourselves subjectively, we can still accept the other with their own subjective optimal paths and walk right beside each other through life. To go back to what I was saying earlier, that the whole goal of this, or maybe the whole point of this, is to share in life. It's not just to find the optimal path and then live until you die, but it's actually to share in this process or in this path as much as we can with our people. I think that's the beauty of life, And the pain of it is then just recognizing where we are rejecting it because we can't seem to allow ourselves to accept the difference. Anyway, that's it for the day. If you have anything extra to say or to add, or you would like for me to, or you just want to give me a different prompt, please go into the comments and drop whatever you have in mind. I would love to hear from you. And until next time, thank you for joining in this flow, and may you find something in it to feed into yours.